Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us. I'm just going to give a bit of a quick introduction and explanation around the series and this evening. I'm Ian Leeson, so I'm the National Participation Manager working in the GROW team. Part of the purpose of this webinar and the series this year is around helping to develop club and class coaches and provide some continuing opportunities for people to, I suppose, grow and learn from each other to, at the end of the day, all want to be better coaches and do a great job out on the water and continue doing a good job. The series is basically going to be facilitated mostly and presented by a number of either performance pathway staff coaches or next level coaches who are already operating in the sort of the top end of the club and class space. So plenty of opportunity for people to learn from each other as well. These sessions are really what you guys and girls make them to be. We can sit and talk at you for the whole hour. That's not going to help anybody. The idea is the more that the idea is the more that you can share and that we can work together and learn from each other, the better that we'll all get. So don't think that this is going to be Matt talking at you for the whole night. This is probably 20 minutes of a discussion facilitated by Matt. And then beyond that, you guys will hopefully come with some prepared questions and thoughts and ways that we can interact. So yeah, just remember, you make it what it's going to be. So what you put in, you'll get more out of. And with that, I shall pass over to Matt to get us going. And I'll let him introduce himself. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks to everyone that's dialed in to participate today. Certainly, what Ian said, very much hoping to get some insight from you as to how you go about coaching your tactics and strategy, and any questions that you have. I will start off with a short presentation around some of the key principles I think are important for coaching tactics and strategy, and then we'll get more into the discussion. So I'll kick it off. I'm going to share my screen. If you have any questions as we go, either put your hand up with the raise button, or just chuck your question in the chat, and at the end of the slide I'll come to you, and then we'll keep moving. So here we go. I'll share my screen. Just give me a second. I'm getting better at this. Maybe Ian, you can let me know that we're all good.
Yep, perfect. All good, Matt.
All right, and I can't see when people put their hand up, so if you can just jump in at the end of the slide, that would be great. Awesome. All right, so coaching tactics and strategy. So I think it's important to acknowledge that as learners, we learn 70% through our experience and doing. So learning on the job. 20% is through our learning from each other, and 10% is like formal learning, like me today kind of speaking to you. So ideally, this little start bit is the 10%, and then we get into the 20% with our discussion, and then we go to the 70% when you take back what maybe you've learned today or found interesting today back to the clubs and to your sessions. I really want to acknowledge that a lot of what I'm presenting today or talking about today, I've basically taken from other coaches or learned myself as a sailor, and either adapted them or just, blatantly reproduced it because I think it's great. I'll try and do my best to give credit where credit is due, and don't be afraid to do the same with my stuff. And yeah, like I said, safe space to ask questions, no silly questions. So a little bit about me. so you know who the nut on the other end of the screen talking to you is. So the top left, my parents, they sailed the Flying 15, and as I grew up, I really looked up to them. My dad is a very clever sailor. He's very good at sailing the wind shifts. He wasn't so strong tactically, but I learnt a lot from him as a young sailor around, you know, sailing the lifted tack and doing the right things. And also it really really sparked my passion for sailing. And then we moved to Australia from the UK, and I started sailing 420s, which was a great class to continue to develop my tactical and strategic skills. I really loved that aspect of the sport, and I moved into match racing, where I was lucky enough to sail with some really great guys and sail around the world on the World Match Racing Tour. Starting, you know, we were ranked 1000th in the world when we first started, and ended up getting up to a bronze medal at the World Championships, which was pretty cool. And now I do a lot of coaching. I'm really passionate about sport and working with young people. And yeah, hopefully I can share some of my knowledge today. And yeah, just on the right, they're my two dogs that keep me busy when I'm not coaching. So my key principles to coaching tactics and strategy are these 5. So 1 is to use a common language. 2 is to simplify with frameworks, with principles and frameworks. So principles and frameworks are 2 different things, but simplify with principles and frameworks, which we'll come to in a second. Always trying to use the wind or wind pattern as the frame of reference, particularly even early on in our development. So even back when I was coaching Little Optimist sailors, really trying to instill that early. You know, understanding where is the wind coming from and how that affects them. That is sailing. So trying not to dull that down too early, but make it simple and empower the young sailors to get their boat around the course, because they know where the wind is coming from. It's not magic. Encourage eyes out of the boat and help with where to look. So often sailors that we see struggling with their tactics and strategy are very eyes in the boat. So encouraging eyes out of the boat and helping with where to look. And lastly is to practice, and to practice deliberately. So they're my 5 principles, and we'll touch on a few of them now. But I think it's important to understand where does it start, and ensuring that we are hitting the right level for your audience. So I know in the group we have a range of sailors and levels that we're working with, and like I mentioned, I think it's important to start at the right level. And how do we start building our strategy and tactics quite early on? Because for me as a young sailor, it was actually one of the reasons why I fell in love with the sport, was because of the game. It wasn't just about going fast. So how do we get those skills early and at the right level? So in putting this presentation together, I got my thoughts down on paper. This is by no means the Bible, but I thought, how does understanding start? So I really think it starts with understanding where is the wind coming from, and how young sailors are able to identify that. So I'm a big believer in putting a wind indicator on the boats early, as a tool to assist. I don't think it's cheating. I think it's a learning tool. So that really helps sailors be able to go, okay, my wind indicator is from the side, which means I'm reaching, which means I put my sail here. Or, oh, I can see the wind indicator is now pointing more at my nose. You know, I'm starting to sail further away from the top mark. Oh, that's a knock. That's what my coach is talking to me about. Okay, I remember him saying I need to tack when I'm on a knock. And then we start to move across the spectrum of understanding where they understand the wind direction. They're starting to be able to see wind on the water. That's such a big part. A lot of, I've spoken to sailors who are 18 years old and still really struggle to see gusts. And I'm like, oh my God, how did that happen? Where did that get missed? And we know that the very best sailors are brilliant at seeing the wind. So I think obviously a big part of this as well is, how do we build skills early, and how do you know where a sailor's understanding is at? I'm a big believer in asking questions to try and help uncover that. And obviously through really critical observation throughout your session, you'll be able to see how your sailors sit along this spectrum. So the first principle of using common language, I think this is critical. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the difference between tactics and strategy. So this is taken from a number of places, including Stuart Walker's book on advanced racing tactics, which has been, very much adapted by Michael Blackburn, the past Australian laser coach, who's presented on this a number of times to the national team and the coaches. But I'll kick off with this. This common language is key for to speak with your sailors. So strategy for me is the fastest way to sail to the next mark in absence of other boats. So that's wind shift, wind speed, current, line bias, and like long tacks. That's strategy. Whereas tactics is boat on boat positioning or boat on fleet positioning to manage risk or influence others or use the rules. So usually you have to use tactics to be able to sail your strategy. So that's where we differentiate the two. And a good way to think about it is strategy. Strategy is like poker and tactics is like chess. So chess, there's almost like an algorithm where you do this move and then this move to counter it is best. And it's like computers can be good at chess because they know the moves, and the top chess masters know this boat does this, I do this. Whereas strategy, you don't have all the information. So you think about poker, you have your first 3 cards in your hand. That might be what you can see up the race course, but you don't know what's coming next. So you have some idea, but you don't have all the information. So I like to think of strategy as being a bit like poker. And the way I teach strategy and tactics in terms of how my sailors are thinking about it around the race course at a more advanced level is like a dial. So when I'm talking to them about a certain situation, it was, how strategically were you sailing at that point? So how much were you just thinking about getting around the course the fastest? Or how tactically were you sailing at that point? How much were you just thinking about the other boats and not worrying about the wind strategy? So I think that's quite important to define with your sailors, the difference, strategy and tactics. And now this is one of my principles is using principles to teach tactics and strategy. So having tactical principles or strategic principles. So you would probably have your own principles, which I'm keen to hear later on. I've just got some examples here down the bottom, but you want your principles to be memorable and work 7 to 8 times out of 10. That's a pretty good 7 to 8 times out of 10. So a basic one is the flap and tack. That's a bit of a rule of thumb, but a good one to start early to get your sailors to be sailing the lifted tack. And then some more tactical principles is cross when you can. Simple to remember, works 7 to 8 times out of 10. There will be exceptions, which is good to explore, and that will help develop understanding. Another classic one, position to leeward in light airs, tactical principle. It's not about where you're going on the race course to get round it the fastest, but it's about that's the best place to position in light airs. So just some examples there. I would, if I was you, develop a set of principles and teach them one by one. Frameworks link your strategy to your tactics at different parts of the race. So essentially, it links the wind and the boat positioning together to help and aid decision making. So some good frameworks, for example, are Ed Baird's First 100 Yards framework, where basically, again, a bit more of an advanced framework, where he's linking how big the wind shifts are, or how strong the wind is, to then what you would prioritize. That's a framework that a sailor can come back to. You can even develop these frameworks into tables or into flowcharts and laminate them and have them in your sailors' life jackets so they can look at them before the start while they're learning them. So another bottom left here, in an oscillating breeze, right phase, start to leeward of the pack. That's part of a framework. So in this type of wind, do this. That's a framework. And then Trax's 3 questions. I thought Trax might be on the call today, but Trax's 3 questions I really like. I use them quite regularly, which is, where on the race course do you want to go? Where can you go? And where do you want to avoid? They're pretty good questions for like a beginner, intermediate strategy tactics session or race. So I encourage you guys to try and develop your own frameworks. Maybe look for some frameworks online, like I've suggested this Ed Baird's framework. I know in some books they have different frameworks, but I encourage you to develop them and teach them. And as I said, must be simple and memorable to recall in the heat of battle for your sailor. And now, this is the last bit I'm going to speak to, which is essentially your session. So how do you go about setting up your session to for your sailor to have a brilliant experience and learn what you're hoping to teach? So I've just popped up here, like, try and use a variety of methods, not just you speaking to them, but where you can, maybe using some magnetic boats to make it visual, or some video of someone doing it well. But I would start with a briefing and clearly outline what's to be learned and what the skill looks like when it's done well. So whether that's video or, like I said, magnetic boats, and then you're using that common language. So it might be, you might be working on sailing the long tack first. So show what that looks like in the briefing, why it's a good thing to do, and then, you know, set up the drill, and then we'll head out. So then you set the drill up, which you've designed for deliberate practice, which means basically you're going to try and isolate that part of the race or that skill and have it practiced. And then you're going to put that skill into a racing situation. Sailing the long tack first, it's going to be a race that you're going to have to set up, but you're going to obviously skew the course to allow those situations to play out. The sailor's then going to sail, and you're going to watch. You're going to watch closely, and then you're going to give some feedback. And the trick with the feedback is it needs to have ability to action. So rather than just telling them what they did wrong, give them something using your common language to try next time. And you can check for understanding. So you can ask something like, in this moment, what were you what made you make that decision? Like, what was the critical thing that made that decision for you? And then in a more simple question might be something like, what did you see in that situation? But from that feedback and from your sales experience, you might need to adjust the environment. You might not be getting what you need out of it. Don't be afraid to change the drill. That's why I've got these back arrows. But it's all about the sailor experience. So you have to watch and check for understanding. And then once you've had your session, you come in, debrief. A number of ways you can do it, but just ensure it's not too long and boring and strenuous. Make sure you hit the critical point from the briefing. So you went out there to work on long tacks. Make sure the debrief is about long tacks and what can they take forwards to their next session or race day. And making sure you're asking what and trying to have your radar on when you're asking questions about what do we still not understand in the group, so that you can work on it next time. But I think this cycle is where it's at, and making sure that you can be quite deliberate about one principle or one area, and you do that for a few different sessions, and quite quickly your sailors will learn some good skills. All right, that's enough of me. I'm in this little room on my own. All I can hear is my own voice, which is a bit painful. So we'll go to the room. So we're going to talk about drill design. And drill design, like I said, is setting up the environment. So we're going to do a drill for long tack first. I've spoken a little bit about that already, but what are some things that we should consider in general in drill design to get the best out of them for a specific skill? For example, like a long tack. Does anyone want to jump in? What should we consider?
If people feel free to just sort of jump in. Obviously, if someone's talking, like be grown up about it and don't talk over them. But let's, like I said at the beginning, the more that everyone can put input into this, the better it's going to be for everybody. So yeah, jump in and go ahead, hopefully. Who wants to be brave?
I'll go first.
Fantastic.
Hi, everybody. I think the key thing for drill design is that if you really want to build on it, you have to start with an easy success early on. If you create a drill that's too complicated, your time is wasted in confusion. So the drills can be amazing, but you need to set them for the abilities and then add to them to build what you're trying to teach.
Brilliant. I love that. Not too complicated. Sailing's a sport full of many variables. You know, we don't need to do too much, and all of a sudden it gets very convoluted. So yeah, a nice, clear, simple drill. There's nothing wrong with it. All right. Anyone else? What else should we consider or could consider?
Something that can be built on, like you say, okay, we're going to do this, and then after 10 minutes, we're going to add a little bit so that you can get a lot done in one session, but without being too complicated, just one thing at a time, add a bit.
Yeah, really nice. So what might be, for example, we're doing a long tack drill. What might an initial drill look like, and what could be a good add-on?
I'm very new to the whole coaching, so I couldn't perhaps tell you for that. But if I was teaching my learn to sailors, you know, how to sail a simple course, For example, I would set up an upwind mark, and then I'd say, okay, after 10 minutes, I'm going to add in a reach mark or a wing mark, and then we're going to do that for a bit, something like that, so that you can change it while you're on the water without having to come back in.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, apologies. I don't think you'd want to be doing long tack first drill with at that level, but the principle's the same. Like, I think you've nailed it. Like, start simple, build on it, and then you can see who's getting it and who's not. So anyone else want to jump in with what we should consider for strategy and tactics? Oh, here we go. We've got Tristan Brown giving us some info. Tristan, do you want to maybe explain that?
Yeah, I was just suggesting maybe if you're working on long tack, that skewing the top mark to one side or the other will make one of the tacks obviously long, and then people that are forced away from that long tack learn pretty quickly the cost of not being on the long tack early.
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly it's like a good way to do this particular drill. I think you'd want to be mixing it up. You know, you'd be certainly making it quite obvious, moving the top mark from one side to the other after a couple of races. And some things to consider would be, you know, are you setting the drill up for success? So are there factors like, I'm trying to think of a good factor, maybe the wind strength or, you know, the skill of the sailors. Are you setting it up that that you're able to get out of it what you want, which is exactly that it's obvious when they do the right thing and they experience that, and it's obvious when they do the wrong thing. All right, we'll move on to our next one, which is for you guys to design some drills. So the first one is probably more of an intermediate skill. I think you can work on covering when ahead, probably from about Goldfleet Optimist, I would suggest. You could teach covering. That's tactical. And then I'm really keen to hear some strategy drills or strategy exercises at different levels. So at an early level, what you guys are doing, or have some ideas at an intermediate and an advanced level. So I'd like to add to my drill library. So, but let's start. So just have a think for a minute, and then we'll get someone to come on and kind of show their drill on the page and just nailed it. So you have 4 boats and 4 marks. You don't have to use all the marks. We want to focus on covering when ahead, which the principle I would use is, okay, we've done a briefing and we're going to work on staying between your opponent and the next mark. So just have a think, and then we'll crack into it. All right. You've been put on the spot pretty quickly, but does anyone want to jump on and have a crack?
I think, Matt, if people have got a diagram, they, you know how we tested it earlier by holding it right up to the screen. If people have got a diagram they want to kind of show to talk through, maybe shots. If you stop sharing your screen, it'll make the image bigger.
Yeah, that's a good shout. And then I can see it. It's my half my problem. I can't see. Here we go.
Yeah, cool.
Does anyone want to give it a crack?
I'll go first, Maddie.
Beautiful. Thanks, Dante.
My name's Dante. Everybody, I recognise a few faces online. I think the tactics and strategy for this one, 3 boats. Actually, I learnt this one when I did my coach course, and I was the one that dished out to do this one. So, and I've done it in real life as well. I guess with 4 boats, I've done it with 3 in real life. 4 is just another element. I didn't really quite to finish the picture, but there's a start line. It uses quite a bit of planning to tell you guys. But if on your countdown 10 seconds beforehand, 1 boat goes, and then at the start everybody else goes. So the first boat's plan is to cover the fleet. I guess the different levels is what you were saying, Matt. Is if you can, the lead boat obviously wants to push the fleet to the ley line, and then everybody else wants to try to bring the game back in the center. The lead boat just wants to shut down an option, and the lead boat's got to try and cover, and all the other boats just got to try and make a mess of it and try and not be covered. And then I guess for the lead boat, or even could be the second boat covering someone else, when do you cover? When do you lead bow? Is it, do you allow them do a loose cover to take them to a ley line? Or do you do a hard cover? What side is the right favoured course? So I guess that kind of is quite a bit planning, and it's kind of at the more top end squad thing. But I guess for maybe even for beginners, one guy's just got to cover everybody, and everyone just tries and not be covered and keep the game in the centre, and the lead takes it out. Does that make sense? It makes sense in my mind.
It'd certainly be easy if you had a whiteboard, but it makes sense to me. I think if you primed the sailors in the briefing around some of their different options that they could use around how do they stay between their opponent and the next mark, or how they cover, and then you have those. You are, like you said, you're going to have those different interactions on the course. Really good learnings to be had. Simple. Someone starts ahead. I like it. And a real trick to coaching is to be able to learn or teach the different skills in different ways. Be creative with your drills. So I love that one, Dante. I'm keen to hear a couple more. So anyone else got one?
Anyone wants to be brave and give us their thoughts? Remember, doesn't matter. Like, this is why we're all here. If you're unsure, or you've just got the rough semi idea of a session, this is the space to have a chat about it, and let's see if someone else might be able to help flesh it out. Cool. Kingsley, you've got your hand up. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm thinking if it's an upwind covering exercise between you and the next mark, you actually start it going downwind around a leeward mark, and then you can nominate the boat that's ahead, and the crowd is just behind it. You can even get in there with a support boat and hold the second row, if you want to describe it that way. So they're going around the mark in whatever order you want.
I really like that. I've never started it going downwind before. I think, on a second beat, you're more likely to be sailing tactically and covering. Nice. I love it. Great. So I guess you could start it in different ways. You could do a downwind start, race to the bottom, and then whoever's in front needs to cover, or you could arrange it, I guess. So you could give different people different turns at being in front. Which is good, because sometimes if you only did a race, I guess your fastest guy might always be in front. He probably gets a chance to practice his covering anyway. So no, nice. I like that one. Any last ones before we move to the strategy on staying between your opponent and the next mark, teaching covering?
I guess from a sailing point of view, I've often gone out and one person, you're sailing along on a reach, one person would go ahead and start sailing, and then they try and stay between the person behind and the mark. And then I guess, yeah, it can add in another boat in there as well. That'd be my thought.
So practicing it on a reach, doing it reaching.
No, like well, you're sailing along, probably on a fairly close haul actually, and the first boat goes ahead, I guess what the other two people were saying, and then they're trying to stay between the mark and the sailor behind.
Yeah, no. Again, another good way to start it. I think in essence you just need someone ahead and boats behind. Another and a mark to race to. You know, I've done it where you can like circle a coach boat and you just blow a whistle at any point and start racing to a mark, and you can then like skew where you are with the coach boat, so you can practice, like Dante was saying, getting sailors to sail the opponents to the ley lines. But essentially, you're just trying to set that situation up, and then it'll naturally force some situations that you can discuss, and hopefully embed some learning. So let's move to the strategy. Sorry,
I was just going to say, I think part of this is thinking about what you're trying to achieve, and it's really hard when there's a whole really diverse, group here dealing at different levels and their own experiences at different levels. So breaking it down and what you're trying to achieve, if you're looking at the less able sailors that are new and have less experience in their boat handling, the idea of covering and learning to simply always tack so that they are upwind between the mark and the other opponents, and to keep the course really tight and small, just gives them that whole experience of control of their boat, and also really heads home the importance of having to do that in a race situation rather than sailing miles and miles and miles outside the course. And so in all of this, it's really key that we keep really clear about what it is, what's the nugget that we're trying them to take home. And the nugget is, in this exercise, that by keeping their boat between the mark and the boat below them, they actually can't leave it. They have to work at keeping that position. And by demonstrating it and then everybody changing places, you get that light bulb moment where they realize that they shouldn't be fearful of close contact, and that fighting actually is quite exciting. And it comes out when you put them into boats for teams racing. And amazing the difference you see from those kids that have dibble-dabbled with a bit of racing and a bit of racing in the club scenario, and then you give them team racing, and they get hungry and aggressive and challenging and really become really close in contact with each other. And it's a bravery that comes on board too. So I think in all these drills, the key thing is to keep them short and tight and repetitive if we're going to have like fast success with a whole variety of groups. And that means that all abilities benefit, but the younger and the more less able benefit because they don't get bored, because it's kept in a very tight, confined space, and they understand what they're trying to achieve. So you're maximizing their success, basically, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's absolutely gold what you just said there. Georgie, is it?
Yeah, sorry, it's Georgie.
Sorry. Yeah. The sailors are very lucky to have you coaching them, Georgie. Yeah, that's the fundamental of teaching and coaching, right? Is have in mind exactly what we're trying to get out of it and design around it. I'm glad you brought up the team racing, because I'm a fan. Certainly sparked one of the things that sparked my love for sailing and tactics and strategy, and to know the rules back to front. So no, I'm glad you brought that up. Dante, you got your hand in.
No, I would say for all you coaches, if you have the opportunity to influence even team racing within your club, it is one of the most powerful tools that we don't use enough. So the schools here in Sydney, quite a lot of the schools are wealthy and they can support sailing within schools, but we could all do it in club level, and actually I think the skills that you build through it are phenomenal. They sort of bring home all the rules that we're always fighting and revisiting, and it sort of makes sense. It's like a penny drop for them. when they do it. So I highly recommend anybody that doesn't do it to pick it up and go with it locally. Yeah, it's easy enough to set up.
Would you do it across different classes, Georgie, or does it need to all be the same class?
It's better if the boats are matching,
Yeah.
but you can do it in opties, Karen, easily. You know, you've got 6 opties. You know, you can easily.
Yeah, we've lost all the oppies at the moment.
Oh, have you? Oh, let's talk.
Yeah.
I think just one point on the team racing to be mindful of, if anyone wants to try, is you do need to be a strong leader on the water in that
Yeah.
scenario, in terms of being onto the rules and onto bad behaviour, because it can spark
Oh,
some
yeah.
bad behaviour. But it's a great opportunity to reinforce the values that you want to see in your sailors around sportsmanship and racing hard but fair, and helping your teammates, helping others. So yeah, I'm a fan. I like it. Let's keep moving though. Dante, did you still have a question, or sorry to keep talking over your hands?
I was we'll keep going. We'll keep going.
We'll keep going. All right. Let's go to strategy. So again, keeping in mind what Georgie said, we're looking to develop sailors' ability to read the wind, to be able to use wind shifts, and basically decide where they want to go to get around the course the fastest. Again, I'm keen to hear from some different levels, but what are some drills that you've used to do that?
Could you repeat the question again, Maddie? Sorry.
Strategy drills. Strategy drills. Drills for strategy. It's a tough one. So you can think maybe what particular part of strategy might you be working on? So it might be trying to sail in more wind, or sailing on the lifted tack. Ash, you got your hand up? You've got one?
Yeah, I thought I'd just tag in. A really good one, irregardless of level, is a fun one where you use your smartphone and you actually film the sailor or athlete beforehand, and you ask them about what their plan is for the race. And so any level this will work with, and it's a cool one because then you get the sailor or athlete to articulate what their plan is given off what they're seeing now. And not only does it give you an understanding of what they are looking at, it gives you an understanding of their articulation. And then if they go out and execute their plan, give them a really big pat on the back. And if they don't, you can have a conversation around why they didn't. And that might be, I got spat out off the start. But it's a really nice one and a fun one. You could do it almost any level. I will say, make sure that due to child safety, be careful around filming children, but you might have some different rules that you need to address, but good one to use for sure, because it's just an accountability piece.
Yeah, I love that drill. That picture early on with the common language slide was literally that drill where this sailor was giving Chris the spiel as to where he was going to go. All right, Kingsley.
Yeah, so something that I've used on a regular basis over the years is drawing a map of or asking the sailor to draw a map of where they've been. And this isn't a technology thing. This is actually, you have a map pre-done, and then at the end of the session, you say, right, draw everywhere that you went and where the marks were, where the start boat is. And I'm going to do it again next week. And what it's doing is enforcing the person to not only think about where they were, but when they're sailing next time, think about where they are so that they can draw it later on. So then they start to get an appreciation of the space that they're in, where marks, how far they've gone, where the other competitors are, all that stuff. It's not a technology thing, it's a brain game, and challenging beforehand and then drawing afterwards. You can match it up with technology and go, well, what happened on this corner? Because that's nothing like what you just said. But the first thing is actually them having a guess where they are.
I really like that. Like, in terms of being able to recall where they were. So like something that we find in the high performance space is the sailors that have I would call brilliant recall and reflection, learn faster, and they become great tacticians and strategists. I love that. You could have I can see myself doing this with a little whiteboard on the boat. Like, tell me on that first beat where you went and why you tacked in those spots. And you could bring it back to a principle, or you could, like you said, you've trying to develop their spatial awareness, which is again like a key point around people being good at strategy.
Yeah. So we developed it further, and you end up with
doing that with the sailors.
And then that also overlays with tide, wind shifts, other things for that particular course area. So then they're actually learning not only where they were, but what effect that had. And then next week you look it up and you go, oh, nor'easter, same as last week. Wonder what happened then on this part of the course. So it's actually like you said, it's a learning tool and forcing people to remember where they are and what's going on.
Yeah, I really like that. I guess a question that you could ask in that scenario is like, what went well? And then they've drawn it, what went well? Okay, put that one in the memory bank for next time. Nah, Kingsley, that's great. We'll keep going. We've got Dante's got his hand up. Was there someone else?
Trax
in
had
front
his
of
up.
you, maybe?
Trax had his
Yeah.
first, yeah.
Go for it.
I'll just touch on it really quickly, Kingsley, because you just nailed it. I think if you go back to what Matt said at the very beginning, that 70% of what we learn is from experience. Our inability to recall is massive. And so the notes I've taken away from Matt's talk aren't so much about the drills, but what are our responsibilities as coaches to make as much sink in as possible. And one of the things we can't ever forget is to, wherever possible, build the recall skill in the sailors. So having them able to articulate where they were in space, really important. Like that was gold, what you just said. So our job as coaches is how to facilitate excellence. At any level, you could be doing that with teaching recall from tackers up.
Yeah.
Just didn't want to let it slip by that wasn't a major, that you nailed it.
No, it was brilliant from Kingsley. And you're right, Trax. Like, I wanted to talk a little bit about the drills today because I know sometimes, I don't know, I get stuck thinking of new ways to do it, or how can I actually go out there and deliver a session. But you're right, it's actually about the experience for the sailor, and that's why I highlighted it in yellow in that 5 in the cycle. Is that's the key bit, because that's where they're learning. So we'll go one more, Dante, on strategy, and then I've got 1 or 2 more slides for us.
All right, I'll try and condense it. Not so much. I know you're asking for specific individual drills, but what I got from my match racing, and I had a little laminated piece of paper, and I've made that for my athletes afterwards as well. I had a little piece of paper, literally like this small, and I just had key points like longest tack, favoured side, favoured at the top, favoured at the bottom, line, bias, tight to leeward or wind river gauge. That was a match racing thing. Top mark default, gate default, and what side to protect. And that little piece of paper that's what I had to, when I was sailing, had to have before I started racing. But then when I introduced it, when I remade them for the guys I was coaching, before the race started, we went through that, coach and athlete, and go, okay, let's work these out. Let's practice together making these defaults. And then they just kept that in their pocket when they were racing. And then I know you're saying drills, but I guess each one, like you said earlier, that you got to teach one individually. But I guess after they have learned what they are and how to utilize them, that's helped me so much.
Yeah,
that's
brilliant. I think that's developing like the frameworks. Like I would see that as developing your frameworks or your principles and your checklists. And if you're doing that with the sailors rather than giving it to the sailors, that's them developing their understanding, and then they're going out and practicing it on the race course and putting it into action. So I love that. That's great. Another way to do it. maybe you can send me your laminated card. I was trying to make some today. Yours sounds better. But no, nice stuff. All right, I'm just gonna, the next slide is basically, I actually won't need to bring it up, so I remember it, is about feedback and questioning. So my question to you is, after a drill or a race or something that you've seen, what are some questions that you might ask to check for understanding or to help embed an experience? What are some of your go-to questions?
Oh, can I start, Matt?
Yeah.
I guess my go-to questions are, they're very specific, but from the instructor background and running the instructor courses, I'm so self-disciplined and really trying to self-conscious in when I ask a question, whatever it might be, I'm really trying to have answered it already, like giving them hints before. If I'm trying to confirm their understanding, I'm explaining it recently and then rewording it differently to ask them, if that makes sense. I'm not just asking a question out of the absolute blue, because then they might make it up or they might re-divert it. Like, I'm really trying to give them the answer before I'm asking the question in recent proximity to give them a crack. So
Okay.
not so much a default question, but I'm setting them up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I kind of scaffolding them a little bit, maybe. I think that can work, especially when the level of your sailor in that space is lower. I think just being careful, if you're leading too much with the question, you will get the answer you want rather than the answer that you need, which is really, do they understand? You know, how have they made the decision? Was it for a different reason that you don't know? Or was it because they thought they saw more wind and they went for it? Or because they thought they were knocked and that's actually a good reason, rather than, oh, I wanted to do this because of this. Actually, that's not a good reason. You know, you actually don't understand what we're trying to do, and then you can build on it. But definitely, like, scaffolding in that way, leading them to the answer, definitely good for helping them action something new next, I think. But yeah, what's another question that you could ask? There's no right answer, just interested in everyone's approach. Kingsley?
I guess just to reflect on sorry to jump in, just to reflect on what Dante said is, like we did a course together the other week. Yes, have the answer that you want to hear, but make sure that you listen to the answer. Make sure you actually listen to what they say rather than expecting what they're going to say. Just a thought. That's probably more from my OT background.
It's massive, isn't it? Like, as coaches, we want to give advice all the time, and it's easy to not listen. And in the end, we need to be the best listeners to pick up on what they do and don't know. So that's such a good point, Karen. Such a skill. Kingsley?
Yeah, mine would, and it seems obvious, but it's actually, I don't think it is. And that is, do we actually know the answer to the question? And it's okay to not know the answer. So it's okay to not know it or be wrong. But yeah, what's our understanding? I've been on coach boats and coaches have asked sailors questions, and I've turned around afterwards after the sailors left, and I've gone, so what's your call on that? And they haven't been able to explain why they asked that question or indeed how they would come to an answer. So it's puts a big onus and an unfairness on the sailor to be asking those questions.
Yeah, I think I think we do need to be purposeful with our communication, right? Like, talk's not cheap, and there's a lot going on in their sailor's head. So if you want it to stick, you can't give them too much. I think it's okay not to have the answer. It's important not to make it up. I might ask, some of these sailors probably see the wind better than I do. Well, they do, basically. They're better than me. But I might ask them, I'm not sure, but then they might have an observation that you then might be able to help scaffold, like Dante said. But you're right, like, you're certainly not trying to ask questions to trip up, or there needs to be a purpose behind what you ask. So just a couple of like quick ones I had. I mentioned it before, the WWW, what worked well, and has anything changed? So that might be like that's more of a intermediate to advanced strategy question. Where did the winners come from? What else could you have done? Like that's actually a good question even for beginners, I think, because what else could you have done there? You don't only have one option when you're sailing. You can tack whenever you want, So what else could you have done? And not in that tone, but what else could you have done? I like when you were a little bit more advanced, how strategically or tactically were you sailing in that moment? And what drove that decision? What was the key point? What was the key thing that made you decide to do that? They're probably some of the questions I use.
I think, Matt, Tristan's put a good point in the chat there, just around any session, and probably more around, as coaches, what are we asking ourselves at the end of sessions?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant, T. Because quite often the sailors, they're not getting what we need out of what the coach wants them to get out of the exercise. So certainly if you ask your sailors what could have been better, it'd be interesting to do it at a young level. But I certainly do ask high performance guys, how could that drill have been better in that moment, that we can keep developing. No, that's good. Very lastly, with the questioning, do you ever question and give feedback while, like, within a drill, like within a race? And if you do, what kind of stuff do you ask? Or what kind of stuff do you say to help develop tactics and strategy skills? What drove that decision? Or Tristan, go Tristan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Matt, I think it's a careful one to not overdo, because what we're trying to create is individuals thinking for themselves, not us prompting them. And like in the races, we're not going to be there. So they've got to be able to make decisions. I think if you're trying to highlight sort of a key situation between boats or something obvious on the side of the course that they might be about to sail through that's going to impact the overall,
what was the key?
That could be used a little bit, but doing it too much is probably a risk of us doing the thinking for them.
Yeah, I would agree. Although I would say that if you're doing short exercises, and there's certainly, and this probably applies to everybody, but asking them, like, what did it feel like to do it that way? Whatever it is you've asked them to do, if they've achieved it, then can they remember the sensation? Did it feel good? Did it feel faster? Did it feel more balanced? Did it feel more comfortable? Did it feel awkward? Did you hate it? Did you like it? Do you feel good that you achieved what you were supposed to do? That actually is a different subliminal take home that they can usually keep more than you just delivering a message, because they've been stopped to think about what it actually felt like. That's my take.
Yeah, it's probably not something I've really used other than like when we're doing speed work, yeah, but maybe not in tactics and strategy, which is really interesting. Certainly something I'll take away and try.
So I've used it on learners when they're just doing tackers and they're learning how to tack, and they're getting in a mess with the extension, and then you're putting them on the water and you're inevitably having to correct them a few times. And once they master it and you bring them alongside and say, right, how did that feel? You've got feedback immediately because they've moved from that clambering, turning the wrong way, or switching their hands in the middle or whatever, and they're actually moving into a sort of smooth routine where they're no longer thinking about it and they can now focus on sail setting and other things. So it's just about them thinking about how it feels, reinforcing it really.
Yeah, I like it.
And it'd be the same for performance, you know, where they've listened to your drill, they've applied it, and after the race, you know, when you're having a conversation, well, how did it feel to be heading the fleet this time? And what did you do differently? And it clearly felt great to lead the fleet. And so they're making them reflect on what it was. You're fixing in what it was that they actually did differently. So reinforcement.
Yeah, awesome. No, and one of the reasons I put my hand up to this webinar was to learn from all you guys out there. And that's, again, something different that I've never used in that space. So that's ripper. Definitely going to take that to a session later this week. Thanks, Georgie.
Right.
Maybe one more from Kingsley on the live feedback, and then I've got a little wrap up, basically. Last kind of little superchargers you can use. Well, I think you can use.
So it was earlier on in the going the long tack. If you have two top marks and they're spread apart, you can actually halfway up the work switch it from one mark to the other, and the new mark becomes the new long tack. So you can move things very easily on the work going upwind. You're not forced into just having one mark that's obvious, and once it's settled, then that's where everyone's going. You can blow the whistle or wave a flag and say you're going to that one now, and then they've got to try and decide how that works.
Yeah, that's probably something I haven't touched on, is adaptability. And it's a key piece, especially as you move up the chain of performance around. It's a key skill, being able to adapt. And the flags, Viktor Kovalenko loves his flags, like green ones, red ones. So that's something like that Kingsley's designed. That's great for practicing adaptability. I love it. My last things with the during, the main one I actually say is, are you high, low, or average? Like, quite simply, like, are they lifted or are they knocked, or are you average? And it just makes them think, and then helps them with what to do next. I don't do it all the time, but that's probably the key thing I ask during. And maybe, what's your next move? Like, what do you need to, and it makes them think, what info do I need to make my next move? Quite often they're not getting what we had. I'm not telling them what to do. It's more of a prompting of thought. Again, I don't know how brilliant it works, but that's what I do. All right, last little bit. So I'll just reshare my screen, and then we can, that'll be it. So just a couple of things that I think are really great for supercharging the experience. So watching the wind on the water from elevation, I think, is great for helping learning to read the wind. I remember standing, I was on a family holiday with my parents at a regatta in Mallorca, standing on a hill watching wind come down off the cliffs. And I so vividly remember that. And I was 15 years old. It's one of the first times I really saw wind move across the water. And that really was where my sailing took off in terms of my strategy or wind reading ability. So I think getting up to some elevation near your club, or on the balcony of the club, if you can see the water, and try and help the kids spot the wind moving. Using magnetic boats at the debrief is a classic visual tool, great for explaining rules and sim level. But ICO to accompany it from the session, and then that sailor itself has experienced it in real time. It's like the triple threat. And I think it's a pretty good way to do your debriefs, and you only need 1 or 2 examples, and you can do a 5 to 10 minute debrief, and you've had some really good impact. This one I didn't talk about in the strategy, but one of our coaches in Perth did 2-up racing in the Optimist, where they had the crew calling the shots. So they did it with the gold and the intermediate. They had the gold steering and the intermediates called the shots, and they had the intermediate steering and had the gold call the shots. So rather than having to focus on steering and trimming, they were literally looking around at the other boats, looking at the wind. So kind of isolating the skill. I thought it was really cool. It was actually born out of a lack of resources. The coach couldn't run the session. She didn't have enough coaches and too many sailors, and she came up with this brilliant idea. I thought it was great. A pre-race routine, racing in patchy conditions, really highlights the strategy. Designing racing elements into your drills. So if you're doing a speed drill, for example, in more intermediate or youth classes, driving a coach boat up above and they have to race you to finish, just trying to get racing elements into other drills. Bit of team racing is good for opties and above, or match racing, and again at a more intermediate to advanced level using a compass. Very lastly, I really encourage curiosity. So I really think sailors should be reading the Bibles, in my opinion, is the advanced race tactics at a high level, or tactics by RYA, or if you guys have some more beginner suited material like this, getting sailors to be curious and read is important. I actually am a big fan of watching YouTube or tracking. So here on the right is an example at the Youth Worlds from last year. So I had a young sailor, Harry, who's really, really fast, but not that good a racer at this point. And this was on day 1, and he made several tactical errors that cost him points and in the end cost him a medal. But after day 1, I looked at the tracking and kind of caught a few key moments at the jibes. So this is him going downwind. The wind's going from left to right. Sorry, I'll make it a bit bigger. The wind's going from left to right. So Harry's needing to round this mark to starboard. And you can see here on the bottom picture, he's gone too far, and he's had this orange boat, ISR, sail past him rather than jibing in front. So he could have been jibing about here and then soaking around this mark. And it was amazing to see the difference when I showed him on the tracks, and he could then relate that to the experience, the change I saw in his racing. And he didn't make the same mistake again. And so in that advanced level, the tracking can be really good tool, or the intermediate level. So if you can imagine from Kingsley's drill, if you'd done the map and you had tracking, and you could overlap them and go, oh, actually, this is where you really went. I think that would be quite a cool exercise to do. And lastly, the video games. We played a bit of Virtual Regatta during COVID, and I actually reckon that's a pretty good tool, particularly if you have the setting where you can see when you're lifted and knocked. It definitely rewarded you doing the right thing by the tactical principles or strategic principles. So I'm a big fan. And very lastly, just be creative, enjoy, share the love of the sport. Don't be afraid to do a session that you dreamt up in the shower, as long as it aligns like what Georgie was saying. You've got something in mind that you're trying to target. If it doesn't work, put it in the bin, but it might be the best session of your life. So be creative, enjoy it. And there are just a few of my favorite books at the bottom. We send to Ian. And yeah, that's it from me. Thank you for listening. I've learned a lot, and I'm open to any questions. Or if you guys have any questions of each other, happy to stay on as long as required.
Yeah, same. Oh, you're still sharing your screen, Matt. Sorry, I think if you just stop sharing. I'm seeing myself like the Matrix. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Thanks, everyone. Like Matt said there, if anyone's got any other questions, please check them in, and we're happy to stay on for a bit longer. I know we've gone over the allotted hour that I said, that I've hopefully people have got a lot out of this evening. I'm also keen, I'll put it, you've got all my email address anyhow, because I've sent the meeting invite out. I will also send on the future one. So the next one will be presented by Trax in July, which Trax and I will come up with the exact date, and I'll be able to communicate that out to everyone that's already registered anyhow. So look out for that one coming. But my only last bit, other than to thank Matt and wait on if people have got questions, is I put my email address in the chat. I'd like, hopefully, we've had about 25 people throughout the period on tonight, 25 emails in this week with just something that you've taken away from this session that you're going to implement in your coaching, whether it's the next time you're on the water or throughout the season. So, and the reason I just want you to email it is things become real if you put them out in the world. If you just think it in your head now, you'll probably never do it. So if you can email me, I won't do anything with it other than it's to keep you accountable. So what one action that you'll take out of this evening that you might use in your own coaching would be awesome to get those. Otherwise, I think there's a couple of questions from people there. Kingsley's plugging, hang on, I can't see what it says. Various coaching tools, new version of trial. Okay, so is this an online simulator, Kingsley?
Yeah, it's an online simulator. It's an app running on Androids and Apples. It's been around for a long time. Major version coming up, which will mean that you can compete against others and then replay the session. So you can actually then revisit what you did and do it from a timeline perspective. So.
Yeah, great. Cool. No, yeah.
Sorry, I've just plugged Virtual Regatta, your competitor, haven't I?
Yeah. Correct. Correct. Mine does all the physics, theirs does the money bit.
Nice. I'll have a look at it.
Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, if anyone's got any other questions, happy to take them now, or otherwise we're all good.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I really enjoyed that, and I've got some things that for sure to take away and try in my own coaching sessions with the Waste team. So yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to hearing from Trax in a month's time.
Awesome. Brilliant. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, feel free to reach out if anyone needs anything.